Welcome to the RAMP webinars. This is component 12, program evaluation and reflection, and you'll see that this component is worth 5 points. I'm Mark Kranz.
And I'm Karen Griffith.
One of the disclaimers we want to make you aware of is that it's critical that you always check the website to ensure that you're always using the most current RAMP rubric. They are tweaked on occasion, and so we just want to make sure that you're aware that it could change, and just check the website. But regardless, the process we're going to go through here and the procedures we're going to talk about aren't going to change just because the rubric has been tweaked a little bit. It's critical that you pay attention to the rubric and allow it to guide your application. It is what the readers use to evaluate your application. It's very specific and clear in what you need to provide in the application. So it's critical that you're always looking at it.
The program evaluation reflection asks you to answer one particular question. That question is listed here. How does your school's comprehensive school counseling program use leadership, advocacy, and collaboration to create systemic change for the benefit of students? Now, I think a good place for you to begin is to read the information about what they're asking. And you can go to the implementation guide, pages 172 to 173, for a more comprehensive description. But the important part to remember is that this is asking a question about what counselors are doing around those 4 big words: leadership, advocacy, collaboration, and systemic change. And it's all about generating positive changes for students. That's the focus.
So in thinking about writing this section, I think it's really important that you dedicate a paragraph to leadership, you dedicate a paragraph to advocacy, you dedicate a paragraph to collaboration, and then the 4th paragraph talks about how those skills led to systemic change and how they impacted students. What were the benefits for students? I think in the paragraphs, it's critical that you cite examples of leadership and advocacy and collaboration. And then you make the link in the 4th paragraph about how leadership, advocacy, and collaboration changed some system. So for example, I would assume that aligning your work with the Ask a National model is a systemic change in the way people, the stakeholders, administrators, teachers, view your role and responsibility. Another example is that because the model is data-driven, and school counselors are the data experts sometimes in their building, that's demonstrating advocacy. You're using advocacy to identify what are the needs of students in your building. You link that to a systemic change if it happened in terms of how stakeholders now see you in your role in the building, that you're the person who's going to ask, in a sense, the so what question. This sounds like a great activity, it sounds like a great program, but at the end of the day, how are we going to know that it's impact? If that's how stakeholders are viewing you as a result of this work, that's a systemic change. That's a result of your leadership advocacy. You need to make that link and always keep in mind how it has benefited students.
So you have an option for this component to submit a written response or submit a video response. There are some suggestions if you choose to do a video. For example, the very first suggestion is to write your script. If you just talk on the video, you're likely to forget components, and we're using the same rubric to evaluate the video that we use to evaluate the written response. So we're still looking for those leadership examples, advocacy examples, collaboration, and how those create systemic change. Follow that same format that you would follow for a written response. Make sure that you honor that 5-minute limit. Readers are having to read multiple applications, and 5 minutes means 5 minutes. It can be helpful to record individuals responding to each section. If you're in a department, you pick somebody to talk about the leadership, pick someone else to talk about advocacy, whatever works best for you. And it can also be helpful to include some graphic representations of changes and data if it's possible and relevant in the video.
So here's a suggested outline if you're going to do a written or video presentation. So there's an introduction, you cite examples of leadership and provide some details about those examples, and you repeat that process for advocacy and collaboration. I can't say it enough, cite examples, and then what's the link? You know, how did leadership change, you know, in terms of the impact it had on program goals, school data. Same thing with advocacy and collaboration. So the process is really the same for all four categories. So I want to emphasize again that there really ought to be a paragraph dedicated to each of these. Do not weave these through a narrative where you cite an example of leadership, then advocacy, then collaboration. It's very difficult to evaluate that kind of narrative.
So after you've written it, consider these questions. Did you answer the question? There are many applications that are really quality, and then they get to this and they don't answer the question that was asked. They answer something they just wanted to tell you. Make sure that all four themes are clearly presented. Again, one paragraph dedicated to each one is probably the best way to do that. Have you provided specific examples around what counselors are doing? Remember, the focus is on what counselors are doing. What did a counselor do in leadership that resulted in a systemic change in the building for how students are placed in AP, for example? Have you described systemic change and student changes as a result? Always link it back to systemic change. That's why we're implementing the model. And that's what we want to identify in this section.
So there are some really great examples on the ASCA website. So if you go to the ASCA website and you look under the RAMP component of the ASCA website, you can look at up to maybe 8 different applications that have all received RAMP. Now remember, RAMP is scored on a scale of 1 to 60. You need to have an average score of 54. I think the examples up there are really strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're always perfect. That doesn't mean 8 of those schools all received a 60. So you need to kind of be discerning when you look at that, but there are a lot of good examples on the RAMP part of the ASCA website. Again, I would really encourage you to read the ASCA National Model. Talks about advocacy leadership and systemic change in some detail, and so does the implementation guide.
In the implementation guide, there is an extensive list of do's and don'ts, and these were pulled from that. You might want to go and look and read all of them. On the do's side, make sure it's well organized and easy for the readers to identify each of the 4 themes. It can be especially helpful to let other people read it, especially non-counselors. And that ensures clarity. It means that you're not talking about using jargon. You're not identifying things that don't make sense to anyone outside of your state. Let somebody else read it. And then check for mistakes. Even if you do the written one, write it in a Word document and then cut and paste it onto the website rather than trying to write in the text box on the website. On the don'ts side, don't omit any piece of the question. You have to address all of it. Don't speak without a script and a plan on a video response that makes sure that you answer all 4 areas. And focus on examples that do demonstrate counselor activities. When there's a focus on those that are not linked to counselor activities, it's going to cost you points.
I think one of the things that happens in the reflection piece is people tell us what leadership means. They define leadership, or they define collaboration, and that's not answering the question. We want to know what your leadership skills are through an example and how they led to systemic change. So the pitfalls. You failed to answer all parts of the question. Recently looked at a reflection, and the entire reflection was well done, was all about collaboration. Failed to talk about leadership and advocacy and how that led to systemic change. Explaining rather than demonstrating examples of leadership, advocacy, collaboration, systemic change. So this is about really ensuring you can cite some examples of leadership and not just saying we were leaders, or we were viewed as leaders. If you're viewed as leader, say, for example, cite an example. That's the critical piece here.
People who are reading these already understand what leadership, advocacy, and collaboration and systemic change mean. So it's not about teaching us. It's about teaching us about what you do in those categories.
So thank you for joining us for this webinar. We hope it was helpful.
And we wish you the best of luck in your application process.